Mint is still $15 a month for premium wireless. And if you haven't made the switch yet, here are 15 reasons why you should. 1, it's $15 a month. 2, seriously, it's $15 a month. 3, no big contracts. 4, I use it. 5, my mom uses it. Are you playing me off? That's what's happening, right? Okay, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Navigate the gauntlet of uncertainty the world throws at your business with SAP. Whether it's a tropical storm hitting your warehouse or a short supply of those little plastic twist ties, SAP can help you tackle those unexpected crushing setbacks with its AI-powered capabilities. To pivot to new suppliers, automate paperwork, and source the twist ties you need at the price you want, so your business can stay unstoppable. Learn more at sap.com/uncertainty.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I am joined by Justin Holmes, a professor of political science at the University of Northern Iowa. Justin, welcome to The Politics Guys.
Hey, Trey, it's great to be here with you.
It is. So you get to take over for Ken today. I'm deeply appreciative of that.
I'm the Ken pro tem, if you will.
That needs to be our new saying for that. I love that.
It's a political science dad joke. It's at the confluence of like all of my interests. So yeah.
Well, it's for good reasons though that we're here. Ken actually is having some good things going on right now.
I like good things.
He's at a wedding, so you can't beat that, right? And I mean, in all honesty, it depends on the wedding, right?
There's a spectrum of yes, but
yes. I think we call that, if we're going to be technical about that, I think it refers to, we got to figure out the variability of our operationalization of the variable of wedding.
Yes.
And on the concept of its enjoyability, there's a wide spread, I think is the way we would put that.
It also depends kind of how entrenched with the wedding industrial complex they are. So.
Oh, there's a true story.
All right. Well, we should probably. It's been a week yet again. I feel like every time we're together, it's like, that's been a week. So
they knew. Well, the thing that we're going to start with actually is not what we originally had on the docket, and that is Comey's indictment. So President Trump this morning and last night as well was celebrating that the DOJ had indicted James Comey. He, of course, is the former FBI director, and he was indicted in Virginia on Tuesday. Trump shouted on Truth Social, and I say shouted, his typical all caps, justice,
random caps
America.
At least. But
Justice in America. One of the worst human beings this country has ever been exposed to is James Comey, end quote. He said on the True Social post. This morning, he followed that up by calling Comey a, quote, destroyer of lives, and again, shouting at us, a dirty cop. Now, what makes this deeply, at least potentially unsettling, is this just comes days after President Trump did something that most presidents would never have done, and that is telling an attorney general, in this case, Attorney General Pam Bondi, publicly that she ought to prosecute him and a few other individuals. Now, the indictment itself makes 2 counts, and I'll go into details about them in a moment, but it is worth noting that the statute of limitations on this would have ended on Tuesday, and the max penalty is 5 years if he were to be convicted. So let's get into that indictment itself. And I actually highly recommend listeners, if you're curious about this, to read the indictment. It is not long. It is a total of 4 pages. And that cover page you can basically ignore. It's like all the handwritten stuff that people care about, but nobody's going to care about thereafter. It's just, getting it in there.
Stuff just doesn't live there.
Yeah, exactly. So the first count is that he dodged not remembering being telling a person to approve of a plan concerning the presidential election. That's the first. If that seems really vague, it is. We're going to talk about that here in a second. The second is that, quote, false statements within the jurisdiction of the legislative branch of the United States government. And so here it is being argued that he makes false claims again in terms of the United States Senate committee meeting that he had not authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source into news reports into the investigation on person one, which here is again likely Donald Trump being person one. And that's all there is. That is in fact the totality of that count. There is no explanation for either of the counts. There is no commentary on why federal prosecutors believe him to be lying, just these blanket assertions that he lied. Now, I recognize, not everybody's weird like us, Justin, and even you and I are we don't look at 1,000 indictments a day.
It's not one of my hobbies, to be fair.
No. So just giving everybody a little bit of context, that's strange. The length of this is unusual, and the lack of specificity is
I was
so
just going to add
unusual.
that. It's so I can't make heads or tails about what he did from
no.
that. So,
I mean, if you want, take a look. I mean,
like a typical indictment's going to have like some facts of the crime and
facts, some evidence, pictures. Yeah. I mean, as a matter of fact, I cannot think of, and nor could I find any examples thereof of anything that looked like this indictment, right? So I just want listeners to be aware. I think that's a really important context when we're talking about this story, how unusual that is. As a matter of fact, if you're curious about some more details, Vox actually had a really good short piece for listeners. If you're curious, kind of outlining what I have already been describing to you, which is the unusualness of this. Now, what are the totalities of his statements, of course, are one of the questions here. We don't know. It doesn't come up at the indictment. It is also not clear if this is about Andrew McCabe or not, as opposed to potentially one of the third persons. He has talked about things, but not unfortunately, one of the things that would make it unusual if it was McCabe is that he has already admitted to lying to a bunch of stuff and has been caught in a bunch of lies. So his testimony alone doesn't seem like it would be able to necessarily carry a lot of a weight for an indictment. Might be one of the reasons this didn't want to be coming forward to start with. The other possibility, with Comey has already talked about openly, is about Daniel Richman, a lawyer that he shared some things with, but it seems unlikely that he would have both shared the sharing of things with Richman, but then not revealed that later. But of course, those were the only two people that could be being talked about here. But there we are. There's not a lot to say. Ken Dillon, he's a MSNBC reporter. He's probably one of the better sourced DOJ reporters. This is what he had to say about it, Justin. He said, quote, what I'm hearing from DOJ sources, the Comey indictment is among the worst abuses in DOJ history. It's hard to overstate how big a moment this is. End quote. At the same time, this morning, Trump talked to some reporters outside of social media, and he said this, quote, it's about justice, really. It's not revenge. As he was departing the White House, he'd go on to say, quote, it's also about the fact that you can't let this go on. They are sick radical left people, and they can't get away with it. And Comey was one of the people, end quote. He would then a little bit later on say he wasn't the biggest, but he is a dirty cop, adding he's always been a dirty cop and everybody knew it, end quote. So, Justin, I mean, I don't even know how to phrase that into a question. So what are your thoughts about this?
Now that we're watching each other, I mean, my eyebrows through this have just been, so, yeah, so many thoughts. I mean, on the one hand, it's hard with the indictment being as poorly done. I mean, there's no other way to put it, as it is. It's very hard to form opinions about it. But I do think that maybe the poorly done aspect of it is really a piece of evidence in itself about what's going on here. So from what's out there, I mean, this is another, and Trump has done this a lot. Kind of the public statements that he makes on legal matters and the legal filings are just miles apart. And I think it's that, even if Trump isn't hiring the best lawyers a lot of the time or can no longer hire the best lawyers, they know enough that they don't want to get like sanctioned, and so, but no, if we go back to, I mean, this is a pattern going back at least to like the 2000 election lawsuits, so Trump's out there making all of these wild allegations in public, and none of those are showing up in the lawsuits. They're like little technical minutia kinds of things, because these are people that are like, I don't want to lose my law license over this. Like, I'm going to, and this feels very much like that, that in its way that, there's this huge, like, I mean, let's face it. I mean, like, he is painting Comey as like, America's Che Guevara or something, and, even if that indictment is true, like, even if they prove it, like, this is some real nitpicky technical stuff, which is not to say that sometimes you can't get in trouble for nitpicky technical stuff. And I
Yeah.
mean,
And
the
you
one, I
gotta
mean,
pay
the
attention
first,
to it sometimes, but
and the
yeah.
first count, I mean, it sounds like they do not use the word perjury, but it sounds kind of like perjury, which, you can't do that. But it sounds, with the alleged facts there, it would be, even if it's perjury, it's over an incredibly minor point, and none of that would translate into this rhetoric about sick individual, blah, blah, blah. And I think this is really a very typical Trump thing in the legal world, is that, and I mean, sometimes he does file stuff like that New York Times suit last week that gets laughed out of court the first time anybody reads it. But some of this, I mean, there's enough there to, kind of work through it, but it never lives up to kind of the rhetoric that he's got. This is like a really standard, kind of Trump moment. Beyond that, if we just look at all of the people that he's rattling off, I mean, Comey, I mean, this gets pushed, because of that statute of limitations issue. And it's pretty striking that Pam Bondi, of all people, was hesitant. I mean, she is quite loyal. And for her to be dragging her feet, I mean, again, without really knowing I mean, it's impossible to know the facts on the ground here because there's nothing there, but just looking at the politics around this, it seems like even Trump loyalists don't think that there's much here worth pursuing, is the
Well,
sense
and
that I get.
enough so, obviously, that it required some changes at the DOJ to make
Right.
this happen. And we haven't even talked about that yet. So walk us through a little bit about that as well, Justin, because again, you have
So it was,
you have MAGA individuals saying, "Hey, I don't think we can do this," and here we go.
yeah, I mean, there were, it has a real like Saturday Night Massacre feel to it, back from Watergate. I mean, there were like two prosecutors from Justice that resigned, I think, over this. Was that the number?
I believe so, yes.
So again, I think that's
Yeah.
another indicator there that, there are people even who are on Team Trump that it just, I mean, and I think it may go as far as Bondi. I mean, it's not like he hasn't been threatening
Well,
this
why else
for
would he put
years.
it- well, why else earlier this week? And he has a very strongly worded public statement to Bondi.
And there is some question as to whether that was a public statement or if he just doesn't understand what a DM is. Is the
I've seen a couple. I saw some of that.
I'm just not sure,
kicking
to be
around.
honest. But
My read was that there probably had been some DMs going on, and I think Trump purposely made it public to put a specific
put
kind
some
of pressure on her.
Yeah, that's plausible.
I don't think that's. I think one of the problems we oftentimes have when we're analyzing Trump is it can be easy to say he's doing something stupid. And I'm not suggesting that he can't. Everybody can do stupid things, but that seemed very deliberate to me and not accidental.
Distinct possibility. I know. I had seen that floated, and 8 years on, he's 10 years on, I guess, from when he announced. I mean, I cannot make heads or tails a lot of the times. Like, is this evil or is this dumb? With him. But I think, back to that point. Yeah. I mean, the structure of this, and I think then combined with, he's constantly threatening to sue, any number of people, most of whom are people that have wronged him in his mind in some way. It makes it very hard for me to take this seriously as a a viable case or as anything other than retribution. To be fair, I mean, this did go to a grand jury.
Well, you know the old saying, though, right?
Something ham sandwiches.
Yeah, right. The right prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich.
Although to point to as a counterfactual to that, the guy that threw a Subway at an ICE agent, they could not get an indictment on him. So for once, they could not indict a sandwich. But I think
to go back to your point. Yeah.
To highlight the process, I mean, you're getting only one side, there's no defense in an indictment. So, if I think you're right. I mean, the right prosecutor in front of the right jury is certainly able to probably get a lot more leverage out of things that maybe aren't winnable when you do the actual like adversarial system with a lot of evidence, et cetera. I mean, on the other hand, I mean, the only thing about this, I mean, especially, we have had like through various like protests and stuff lately, there are grand juries that are not returning charges, so, this does, and now again, it's a question of, who is arguing this, who is on that grand jury, et cetera. But I mean, that is the only thing that gives me a smidgen of, well, there might be a little something here, but, and again, not that the kind of thing that you plead down to a 4th degree disturbing the peace misdemeanor or something, but even there, I mean, I think the motivation behind this is just blatantly revenge. I mean, anybody that has ever tried to hold him accountable, he is going to go after. And I think the other part of this, and this is, this is like Trump's totality. I think this is going back to pre-presidency. He has always used the courts to badger people. He has always used the courts. And I think the issue is that he doesn't have to win to get what he wants. And that goes back to him in business, and this is, it's expensive to defend yourself legally. It is damaging to have your reputation hurt, et cetera. And, even back when he was in business, he dragged people to court over stuff that he probably wasn't going to win, just to put pressure on him, and I mean, what's James Comey going to be on the hook for spending? Like, even if this gets tossed, at the first sort of hearing on this, I mean, he's going to be into 5-figure legal fees. I think that's as much as anything. I'm not sure if Trump even cares if he wins or loses. He wins at his game just by causing you trouble. I'm not sure that it matters if Comey goes to jail, just to be able to say mean things about James Comey, and cost him some money and whatnot. That may be all that's here, in reality. And I think that, at various times, I mean, those Trump media lawsuits were absolute nonsense. The couple that they settled. And again, there's an idea that,
but they settled, which is evidence in your favor.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, look, I mean, do we want to piss off somebody that controls the FCC? Do we want to piss off somebody with deeper pockets than us where, we could settle this for less than it would cost to defend it, kind of thing. And, I think a lot of this is just harassment, to be honest. And, if he gets what he wants policy wise, that's icing, on some level.
Yeah.
But, I don't see much other, without any inside baseball knowledge beyond the kinds of things that you've been seeing, I just don't see much here. And to be fair, I mean, this is, I've been maybe a little jokey here, but this is really, really dangerous to take a moment here. I mean, you absolutely can and should prosecute people in government for wrongdoing when there is wrongdoing. It is incredibly sensitive. Because whenever you do this, there are always going to be questions about motives. There are always going to be questions about score settling, et cetera. But in general, as a principle, that is okay. Everything that is here feels very much like this is a very much more, using the resources of government to harass critics. And, again, there is a lot of discussion, when is it authoritarianism? Like, when will we know? And there's not a bright line, but these are the kinds of things that feel tremendously authoritarian. Again, not that you can't prosecute people for things, but like with the board of governors of the Fed and the mortgage fraud charges that turned out to be not true. It looks like she did everything by the book. These are the kinds of things that are not supposed to happen. This is the kind, abusing the legal system to entrench your power is, again, I'm not saying this is the moment that we become authoritarians, because I don't think there's a bright line, but this is real bad, and I mean, even if Comey gets this tossed at the beginning, which I have a fair suspicion that he will, and he sure as hell better fight it, and the other story we're going to talk about, we're going to come back to that theme, I think. I'm hopping mad, but
no, it's all good.
But this is
It's
really
all good.
scary stuff. This is not the kinds of things that should happen. And yeah.
Well, and I think, to maybe put a bow on that package, you're right. I oftentimes like to say, well, what would the counterfactual universe look like if we said we wouldn't have those kinds of concerns? Why are two political scientists giving you this kind of answer? And the answer is one, we wouldn't have heard from Trump about this initially, right? So there would have been, there would be no public communication, and probably no private communication either between Trump and Bondi over what ought to be happening here. And instead,
to be clear, there's supposed to be a wall between justice and the president. They are. They are an executive branch agency, but presidents are not supposed to be directing this. That's
exactly
a long tradition.
We would have seen that in public. There would have been no true social poison or whatever kind of post, doesn't matter. And instead, we would have seen Pam Bondi bring some kinds of charges. We would have seen a very different kind of indictment. We would expect no one to have resigned in the course of that process, right? That would be, and we would look at the indictment, and whether we thought it was likely to win or not, we would say this looks like other kinds of indictments that have come. And I think, as you rightfully point out there, Justin, technicality things, when you are in fact in a position of power, can matter, right? So it's not as if the stakes of it mean that it doesn't have meaning or legality, but it's those kinds of counterfactual issues that make you look at it and say, oh, and then at the same time, you're calling this guy, the biggest crook the country has ever seen. I mean, you want to talk about a bombastic statement to be making.
I mean, even
that's crazy.
Even if he's guilty of what's there, I can think of a couple hundred bigger crooks off the top of my head.
Only a few hundred, huh? Maybe
starting at A, yeah. So,
so I just say that though to kind of give us an idea of, why did we get to that gravity of the moment that you were laying out there that I think is important. So we're going to have a break for just a second, and then when we come back, we're going to be talking about Trump's Tylenol case.
Yes.
So, Justin, I want to start by just saying, I don't know if you've done this a lot, but it is extremely hard to read President Donald Trump's speaking. I
have a lot to say about that, but yes, I agree.
We're going to talk about that. When I do the show, we've talked about this before, I read the actual transcripts of the items to really kind of get a feel for people. I've done this long before Trump was president. But when I was reading for this show, as I always do, the transcript of events about Trump's press conference with RFK Jr. and then his UN speech, which we'll get to in a little bit.
Wish you could become a morning person? The type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
I was once again struck by the fact that President Trump comes off, when you read him, I defy anyone to look at it and tell me that it doesn't sound illiterate. In
I've always said I feel bad
ways.
for sign language translators having to deal with that, but yeah,
That's the funny way to put it.
that's the funny way to put it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you. So I'm actually I'm teaching a political communication class this semester, and kind of the first chunk of it is that we read kind of a series of speeches in a kind of analytical fashion. And I try to grab, so there's kind of categories of speeches. And so we do kind of, themed weeks, roughly. We just finished crisis speeches yesterday. Go, if you need to cry a little bit, go watch the Reagan Challenger speech. It's like literally, I had college students tearing up. It was really weird. But I always include something from the current president, as something. And something that I've always said to them, anything where there is, FDR and later where there's video, I always provide a transcript and video. And I say, look, most of the time it's going to take you longer to read it, or to watch it than to read it. And, watch 5 minutes to get the flavor or whatever, but you can just read him. And with Trump, it is the text is largely incoherent,
Yes.
and where I will stick up for him a little, far be it for me to, but where it is that a lot of the time, although I don't think this week was that time, but a lot of the time, things that don't make sense on the page make sense in context when he says them. So he has a particular cadence. I've always thought that it's like he's doing really bad stand-up is sort of like the rallies in particular.
That's not a bad way of thinking about it. I've oftentimes thought about it as a string of X posts, right?
Yeah.
It's like he's putting together, it's a thread. It's there's theoretically a commonality for them, but they're not paragraphs. They're not, they don't fit together in that way.
But it does. There's a rhythm to it. And there are times, I will say, in his defense where kind of what he said and the way he said it was taken out of context. Now, I would still argue that what he said was ridiculous and probably inappropriate, but I think if you listen to it versus read it, so to give an example of that, actually, if you remember that line, and I think this is from 2016, I think, there was a line about Second Amendment people that caused kind of a big, in regards to this. It was in regards to Hillary Clinton. And so kind of the headline is, he talks about Second Amendment people, like these are people. If you listen to it in context, he's kind of, on the one hand, it makes sense. On the other hand, it's still something you probably shouldn't say. But it was about, Hillary Clinton on some policy. And it was something, it was like, well, Americans will never accept that because, the Second Amendment people, it's like Second Amendment, man. So it's that, like, he's very, I'm not sure if it's emotive is the word that I'm looking for exactly, but it's the meaning in a lot of what he says. It's like the trial scene in My Cousin Vinny, for those that where they read the transcript back, and there's the line about like we killed the guy, up voice to indicate question, and they read back the transcript, we killed the guy. It's so I think, but I think with Trump, I mean, there is a lot of that. I think here this week, I mean, both speeches are, to my mind, just incoherent, both on paper, but also I think there's nothing redeeming in them, as far as content. I mean, there's I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt in certain moments, but here it's, I mean, even this doesn't, even the spoken version doesn't make any sense, let alone what's on paper.
Well, with that prelude to these, let's
Sorry,
start
long
here.
prelude,
So,
yeah.
No, it's a good prelude. I think, and it's an important point, right, to try to give some credit to that kind of communication. Because
just
it is,
maybe
in
it's-
fact, a more prevalent version of communication than I think some people want to give it credit for. Come listen to some of our students in the way that they communicate.
And as I've kind of said to my students all semester, I said, you do, whether you like him or not, I mean, you need to take this seriously because he is an effective communicator to a certain audience. And kind of the way that and so the way that he is doing this, to you and I, recognizing that he's no Churchill, he is an effective communicator in his way. And so, I but again, sorry to sidetrack, but he is, it's borderline gibberish, I feel like at this point. But go
well. So let's get into the content of it, right? So
yes, please.
He starts the meeting by saying that he has been waiting for this meeting for, quote, 20 years. Why? Because he explained back when he was a developer. You remember that, don't you? As he puts it, he met with RFK Jr. and they, quote, had strong feelings about autism, end quote. I mean, I have strong feelings about a lot of things too, but, and as he would go on to put it, he would say, quote, we understood a lot more than a lot of people who studied it, end quote. So this is the starting point. Is I've been thinking about this for 20 years. RFK Jr. came to me when I was a developer and we already had this figured out is basically what he's starting this communique
and this
on.
is where my blood just boils already as somebody who is a dyed-in-the-wool quantoid empiricist. I mean, right there, I'm just chomping at the bit, but continue.
Continue. I know. I'm going to let you loose in a minute. I promise.
Yeah.
And listeners, I promise you too.
We'll muzzle Justin for a minute here.
No, it's okay. I like that. Right. So now let's just call that a bold claim. Let's start by saying that's a bold claim. He then follows that up by suggesting that it was all a grand conspiracy because he goes on to say, quote, because I don't think they were really letting the public know what they knew, end quote. In other words, that we could prevent and knew the causes of autism. Now, there used to be this author. He was very popular. I remember all the books he had. Everything, all the cures they didn't want you to know about, or the money market trips they didn't want you. There was about 20 of those.
Conspiratorial day.
And he made a lot anyway, but we used to make a lot of fun of that at grad school. But that was it was the conspiratorial day. He then goes through a bunch of numbers that I am not able to actually present to you on the air here because he keeps giving a different set of numbers. I don't know what to make or to follow of those numbers. I've read them carefully. I've listened to them. It is what it is. If you think I'm wrong, go take a look at it. But the part that we can get to there is he finally, at the end of those numbers, says, quote, there are certain groups of people that don't take vaccines and don't take any pills that have no autism, end quote. RFK Jr. will then kind of pop in and say, well, heads up, that's the Amish people, right? So I'm just going to pause so far. This is just the intro to our Tylenol study. But let's take a look at some of this as social scientists, guys who look at data and things and what is already wrong here, right? And I'm going to say right now, this is I don't think I have ever been quite this bold in talking about a claim from any politician. And Justin, you correct me if I'm wrong. I would say that some of my worst students in my undergraduate researcher class doing a literature review could have done a better. I have seen better terrible papers as a literature review presented to my class than the beginning of this. And I don't mean that as an insult, and I don't mean that as an attack. I mean that is an empirical, quantifiable fact.
This is a D project at best.
Exactly. And so let's go through this a little bit because I think it really is important. That's what we're trying to do on this show. So one, for example, here we are already at the Amish question. Clear. There is no evidence, zero evidence that there is a lack of autism in Amish communities. There could be a lower level of detection, or there could be a lower level of those rates in Amish communities. But if you want a little bit, a 2010 geneticist study found that autism occurred in approximately 1 in every 271 Amish screened that they did specifically of a sample of 1,899 in the Amish communities in Ohio and Indiana. By the way, I know them pretty well. I used to drive through them. So that clearly demonstrates that there was, and that's not the only paper. I'm not citing some one-off. I'm citing one of the most recent done on it, 2010, that shows that there were in fact numbers. And one of the potential problems that they themselves recognize is that for what they were doing, the sample size is not teeny, but almost 2,000, but for what they're doing, it's relatively low based on population data, which means that we were earlier teasing about like the variability. This is where, is this number low because it's a one-off sample, or is it low because it's representative of the actual population? So I'm just going to pause there on that particular point. The idea that he's also putting forward here that then continues to come forward, the idea that vaccines are also the problem, is without evidence. The research paper that is most often cited that RFK Jr. seems to be once again pointing to here is from Andrew Wakefield. That study was in fact pulled. And I want to if you're listening to this, it is not normal to have vetted, peer-reviewed journaled things pulled. That only comes because there is clear and compelling evidence that the actual reviewers had the wool pulled over their eyes by such deceiving lies that the article itself has to be pulled back. And that is precisely what happened. As a matter of fact, a variety of studies have shown that there is absolutely no link between the MMR vaccine and autism. One of the biggest of these is the 2019 Denmark study, which looked at, and I'm not teasing here, people, 57,461 children in their population. This is a huge sample.
But who's counting?
Yeah, exactly. Well, us empirical researchers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love the precision down to the last digit.
Well, this matters. Now, let's get back to the main claim, which is that Tylenol is a problem specifically for pregnant women, or is the way that he put it in this thing, quote, "Don't take Tylenol," end quote. Now, let's be honest. There are several studies that have found a potential correlation between Tylenol and autism. I'm going to be very careful about my words here. A correlation. A correlation means that we see two variables appearing at the same time in a particular sample. At this juncture, there has not yet been found any mechanical link between that. Now, even though that's the case, there are also other studies that are still happening right now, including the largest published on this, which is a 2024 study by the NIH, which in fact found that there wasn't even any correlation at all between autism and what we commonly call Tylenol in pregnancy. That study is about 235,000 children that they're taking a look at. We also have the Boston Birth Cohort study, which found a potential correlation link in their case. However, as the researchers point out, it's a correlation only. And again, they found no mechanism, meaning that one possibility that they float in this particular study is that the pregnant persons who are experiencing pain, there could be a third factor that's creating the pain, which is why they're then taking Tylenol, right? So it's not that we call this an intervening variable. In other words, the classic example, if you've ever taken an undergraduate stats class or my data analytics classes.
Oh, I think I know where this is going.
Ice cream and heat.
Ice cream and drowning.
Ice cream and drowning is another beautiful one. Right. Why? I mean, it's not that the ice cream caused kids to go jump in pools and to lose their minds. It's because the same.
They didn't wait 45 minutes.
Exactly. Well, I think it's 50, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So now there's also a 2.5 million children's study done from Sweden, which suggests, quote, that associations that we see between Tylenol use during the study and were able to then hold other factors in common, found that the Tylenol use was non-causal and probably due to familial confounding variables like genetics, end quote, right? Mm-hmm. In short, the pain is an indicative of something else. Now, does that mean there have been some correlational studies? Should we continue to look at this? Absolutely. But right now, there is and has been found and replicated the standard guidance that we had prior to this which is that pain itself may be a higher risk for autism and ADHD, specifically, heads up, migraines. Now, why is that the case? Because we don't know those causal mechanisms. We don't have the answer to that. And there you go. That's a really difficult, fascinating puzzle. There's a potentiality of a link here, but the link appears to be what we call an intervening variable. Instead, what is presented here in this is that Tylenol is the causal agent that has somehow been hidden. And then on top of that, we get this additional kind of insidious background claim that vaccines then are also part of this larger, and we throw out that as if it is something. And it's amazing how many people I've seen say, well, look at this study, it shows that there's this correlation. Absolutely, I'm there for it. But let's take a look at the totality of the literature on it, because that's what you want your doctor to do, and that's where we are right now. So Justin, take us away on that, my friend. I've muzzled you long enough.
No, I agree with everything that you said, and frankly, you have more detail on those, and I appreciate you for it than I do. So, thinking through this, I mean, there is to talk about kind of research design a little bit. I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction.
Please.
So, a lot of medical studies are like double-blind trials, and so, that is kind of the gold standard if we're trying to do causality. So, for example, my brother's in-laws were actually part of the Johnson & Johnson COVID trial. And so if you want to know if a vaccine works, what you need to do, or a medication, and if you want to know effects, because they're all like side effects, they're looking for that, as well, because there's going to be cost benefit. I mean, any medication has cost benefit stuff, to be clear, like Tylenol is actually pretty bad for you in a lot of ways, other ways.
It is not as if it sits without any other issues.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and especially, it's people using it for hangovers because they're both hard on your liver. But I'm not that kind of doctor, but just, a little advice. But that's kind of the gold standard. If we're kind of assessing causality, we need to know, okay, we need to have people that clearly had the treatment, people that clearly didn't have the treatment. We randomize them so we know that they're not different. We also don't tell anybody that is observing them or the people themselves so that they don't behave differently. We don't tell them if they got the medication or not, because, there's all kinds of what we call confounds, things that you would introduce that would be, so, what happens, say in the COVID vaccine case, you give people the vaccine, and those people or you give people what they think is the vaccine, and they go out and they start going to parties because they, or something at a rate different than the other group, so we don't want to do
they know
any
they didn't get it. Yeah,
exactly. So, that's why that's the gold standard. For a lot of things, we can't ethically do that. We could design a standard very easy to test this. We could get a bunch of pregnant women together, and we could randomly assign them to take, pills of various doses. Some get Tylenol, some get lots of Tylenol, some get a placebo.
No Tylenol. Yeah.
And then, this is a long study, but then, we track the pregnancies, and, 10 years later, we track their kids and see if there's a difference. If we think there's going to be a problem, like the ethics of doing this is terrible, like randomly assigning people to get something. The example I always use in class, when I make this point is like chemotherapy. Is it ethical to do a cancer trial where, half of them get chemotherapy and, you just had, 10 weeks of glucose infusions, no, we can't do that. So that's why we have to look in these other places, so like to stick up for epidemiology, I mean, correlational studies, to throw a couple terms out, the concept of validity. So internal validity is basically, can we make a strong causal claim? And experiments are really good at doing that, outstanding at doing that. And for some things, medical stuff and things, they work well, I think, but for sort of the ethical concerns. A lot of social science things, they don't work for, I don't think there. But you can still do, I mean, kind of a correlational epidemiological study is still legitimate research. But just to put a bow on what you've said, we have to be a lot more careful about all of the conclusions that we draw, all of the things that you're describing. What else are we measuring? Can we statistically rule out various confounds? Is there something squirrely about our sample? Is it a big enough sample? Because again, for a lot of disease things, where it's infrequent, we often, I know as a political scientist, we're looking at, oftentimes when we do samples of like 2000, we're looking at, pretty big differences, but large size groups. Doing a sample of a couple thousand for something that rarely happens isn't very useful. To your Amish study point, I mean, I'm shocked that they were able to kind of analyze 2,000 Amish people, or
Yeah.
That's amazing. But the rates there, you get one extra one or one fewer one with autism, and that totally changes your rates. So these are considerations. There's the confounding things. This has been a discussion, sometimes in studies of correlational nature. This has been kind of a big replication question in psychology in particular, but political science to a degree as well. Sometimes you get correlations that not only aren't causal, like you're saying, but sometimes stuff just correlates by accident.
Yes.
I had on my Facebook profile for a while a picture. There was a website that had graphs of spurious correlations that not only are caused by a third thing, but are just absolutely random. And there was one, it was the price of margarine and the divorce rate in Maine were correlated in a statistical significant way, over this period of years. And there's no causal story there. There's no nothing, it's just that if you throw enough variables at the wall, occasionally you'll get a false positive. So one other reading of kind of what you've got here is that it could be, if you're only seeing one or two studies where this pops, sometimes stuff just pops, even if there's no meaningful relationship, at all. The other thing I guess I would add, to this is, even if there is, and this is something that I think even people doing empirical work in the social sciences don't always understand, is that there is a difference between a statistically significant relationship and a substantive meaning relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to go very far down this rabbit hole, but
I have a book on that if anybody wants to read it.
Yeah. But basically, if I can make this, I'm going to try to do this in like 30 seconds. When we talk statistical significance, essentially, for most of the methods that we use, a number 0 would mean that there's absolutely no relationship between two things. You're never going to get a 0. You're going to get some number, but there's going to be enough variation around it that there's some level of uncertainty. So like if you've ever seen a margin of error in a poll, like that's kind of how uncertain of a result we are. And statistical significance, it's that same logic, and they're just doing a little more math to it. But it's essentially saying, are we confident that this number that we're seeing is different from 0? So, and, boom, if you get a bunch of those uninteresting things, you get published in a good journal, and whatnot. I mean, that's there. What I think even a lot of people do not take seriously is to look at, well, what is the effect size here? And it is possible, especially in a sample of 200,000 plus whatever you had on the end of there, or 600,000 or, whatever. It is absolutely possible to find a statistically significant relationship that is not substantively meaningful. It is not 0, but it is like, would be the equivalent of like, 3 extra cases per 100,000 or something like that. It could theoretically be that. So, I think, I don't want to say that these studies are junk, but there is a lot of, and that's what happens when, and this is where I'm going to get mean, when stupid people read research. This is the kind of stuff that happens. I got into this with Jay a little bit a year or two ago, because one of the things that just pisses me off is when people say, well, I did my own research. And it's like I had to sit through like half dozen classes on how to do research, using terms that you can't comprehend. And you watched a YouTube video on the toilet. We are not doing the same thing. that's the level of conceptualization that RFK and Trump have. I mean, these are just not people with any training. I will go so far as to say that everything I have seen out of RFK indicates that he is just not a very bright person in general. And so somebody with no training, you throw a couple statistical stars, we put stars to indicate, significance.
Yeah.
You throw that at him, because he has no idea what he's doing, but he sees stars, he rolls with it. There's also the motivated reasoning component. He's angry at these things. Really low standards of review, as far as that goes. So, again, I am not offering medical advice by any stretch of the imagination, just as my disclaimer, but nothing that they've presented indicates that this is the issue. The Wakefield study, yeah, again, I can't believe they're trotting that back out. I mean, that's been discredited for 20 years, and I will say I've read it, and while I am not a doctor, I know enough about research design. I was a little surprised, actually, that it even got through peer review in the first place, let alone the shady issues. It is not a well-designed study on its face. Like, it has, there should have been some red flags. But to drag that back out, and further, two last points, and then I'm gonna stop. But further, one, just where we open this, the idea that, a real estate developer and a fail son of the Kennedy dynasty know better than the experts is just absurd. I mean, it's the equivalent of like some guy it's like talking to Cliff Clavin at Cheers. I interviewed with him years ago. He said, I used to go to bars in New England, and there's this one guy that is always just a blowhard about the way the world works, and won't shut up. And that's very much what this feels like. I got a theory about how the world works. And, I don't think Trump was even talking about this 20 years ago. He doesn't care about this. This is expedient. So, that is I think another component of this, just that the assault on expertise is I think highly problematic. And I think, finally, just kind of in terms of all of this, ultimately, I mean, the take home here, the politics, it's such a weird statement. I've even seen something from some anti-vax people that said, wait, what? It wasn't the vaccines? It was
Yeah.
Tylenol? So it's all of this is just so weird. And it's so, and this is weird because I'm me, but you probably feel this too. Having done research and knowing what goes into it, it is so offensive to me the way that they talk about research and researchers. And, not all research is good. That's why we do peer review.
Mhm.
I've had a hell of a time getting stuff published, so it's, not all research is good. Not everybody, people make mistakes. People do fabricate, I mean, there have been people that have lost jobs over data fabrication, as they well should, I would add. But on the whole, the enterprise here is one of gaining knowledge. And the thing, what was RFK's statement a while ago? That we will have solved autism by September, as though we have found the cause of autism by September, as though people in science haven't been studying autism for 60 years. And somehow this guy is going to come along and solve the origins of this problem in 3 months. I mean, setting aside even who these guys are, if you had a Manhattan Project of figuring out what causes autism, which maybe we should, or maybe we shouldn't, because I think a lot of it is increased surveillance and frankly, a changing definition. That spike, it's not the same thing that we called autism 50 years ago, is part of it, which is not to say that rates may not have changed, but that big spike is a definitional change, as part of it. But even if we got the smartest minds in America in medical science together, they're not going to solve the cause in 6 months, and it's just, or 3 months or whatever that number was, these are people that are fundamentally unserious. They're fundamentally do not understand how kind of the acquisition of knowledge works. That's it. I'm done. I'm
Well,
spent.
That's fair, and that's fair. And you introduced so many good concepts there. And yeah, we could talk more about naturalized experiments versus non-naturalized experiments, population studies.
I did 20 minutes of this for my poor students in Polycom the other day, and I'm not going to replicate that for you.
Yeah. But I think we have hit those kind of important those important points, and I think what we should probably do is move to the second speech.
Let's face it, our democracy is facing fundamental threats. Many of our government's critical checks and balances are being dismantled, challenged, or outright ignored. I'm Simone Leeper, host of Democracy Decoded, a podcast from Campaign Legal Center. This season, we're focused on specific weak points in American democracy, how they're being exploited, and the innovative solutions that can reverse this downward spiral and strengthen our nation. Look for Season 5 of Democracy Decoded wherever you get your podcast.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
Which is UN. No, it's nothing to be sorry about. So Trump came out swinging this past week, Justin, in his UN speech. He starts by saying that there was 4 years of weakness, lawlessness, and radicalism under the last administration, delivering our nation into a repeated set of disasters, end quote. But now it is, quote, a gold age of America, end quote. And after Biden's economic destruction, quote, under my leadership, energy costs are down, gasoline prices are down, grocery prices are down, mortgage rates are down, and inflation has been defeated. The only thing that's up is the stock market, end quote. As for Mexico, quote, we have successfully repelled a colossal invasion, end quote, by getting, quote, the illegal aliens admitted entry out of the country has now been zero. Hard to believe, because just 1 year ago, it was millions and millions of people, end quote. He would go on to say that likewise, in a period of just 7 months, I have ended 7 unendable wars. They said they were unendable. What are these? Cambodia and Thailand, Kosovo and Serbia, Congo and Rwanda, Pakistan and India, Israel and Iran, Egypt and Ethiopia. And the problem, he will go on to tell us, is that the UN was not the one doing these things. And he, as he would argue later, quote, should get the Nobel Peace Prize for each one of these achievements, end quote. He would also talk about Gaza and the need to end the war, but not to recognize Palestine as a state, because that would benefit terrorists and reward them. As for Ukraine, he had some interesting statements, Justin, including, quote, I thought that would be, of the 7 wars that I stopped, I thought that would be the easiest because of my relationship with President Putin, which had always been a good one, end quote. He would go on, though, to not take full responsibility. He said, quote, this war would never have started if I were president, end quote. And he would spend some time attacking the biggest purchasers of Russian oil for allowing the conflict to go on, pointing to China and India, and then, of course, the EU. Now, there was a lot going on here, and you'll notice I'm really trying to stay away, although feel free to get into the, he had nasty things to say about the teleprompter and the fact that, his escalator didn't do what he wanted it to do. And, it's a good thing that Melania is strong, apparently, because, I'm just going to put that aside because that's kind of petty weirdnesses. I mean, that he brought him up, but, we can put that aside. In terms, though, is that his big attacks here are, one, I'm a peacemaker, right? I'm the biggest peacemaker that there's ever been. If the right people would just get on board, we could have peace with Ukraine. Now, what is interesting about it, I'm curious about your take on this too when we get there. I mean, he is for the first time blaming Putin openly in a way, which is a shift. But he continues to blame the purchasers of oil, and I can actually agree with him on that front. I think there's room.
There was a statement again on that today, and my thought was about India, and my thought today was this might be the first thing in like 6 months that I feel like he might be doing.
He's right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would agree. And it's not just India. The EU, as they recognize, continues to be one of the biggest. As a matter of fact, when you take a look at it, EU as a whole, even after all the bans and price caps that they've had, they remain the second larger importer of Russian oil after China. It goes China, EU, India. I mean, that's the ordering right now. Now the two biggest, of course, inside of the EU are Hungary and Slovakia. So Hungary obviously doesn't care about this, but nevertheless, I'm with you. I think there's some good points there. Trying to push on
also,
that.
Only the only good points, I think, probably out of all that, but.
I do, but now the part that did not get a lot of attention in the media that struck with me was we once again see this slightly veiled racism coming out, arguing that it's the great replacement. It's the boats filled with immigrants are going to come and they're destroying your country. He turns to Germany and says, in terms of the border, he argued that 50% of German prisons are filled with foreign nationals or migrants. He then points to Austria and Switzerland, where he says directly, quote, "When your prisons are filled with so-called asylum seekers who repaid kindness," and that's what they did, they repaid kindness with crime, "it's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are all going to hell," end quote. And that that really didn't get a lot of attention this week. But we go back just a second ago to an earlier story. There is absolutely no evidence that half of any country's prisons in the European Union currently are filled with migrants, and if you want to do what he's doing here, which is suggesting asylum seekers specifically, it's fewer yet. But let's take him at his most generous and just call them.
You could have all of the
migrants.
Asylum seekers in jail over for dinner, probably.
There's not that many. That I think is what most bothered me about this kind of speech. It's not that again, I think he's actually right about the fact that the UN has not really been an effective agent for the kind of international stability, the levels of international stability for which we have hoped traditionally. And I'm broadly an economic liberal, so I'm on board with international organizations, but it does appear that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that what has actually increased those kinds of items has been, but again, this is not something that Trump wants, has been increased in closer trade relationships between countries, has resulted in additional peace in a way that I don't really think the UN, again, I'm not suggesting the UN has done nothing. I want to be careful. I'm not trying to make a grandiose claim here. But I do think one can point it to some of those problems, and that they have, by the nature of their structure, because we have a Security Council, have not actually been able to tackle some of the bigger issues, the bigger conflicts, especially as they relate to permanent Security Council members. And so, of course, Ukraine is never going to be a tractable issue in the United Nations because Russia is a permanent member. And I think it's rightful for the President of the United States at a UN speech to call that kind of behavior out. And so I can get behind Trump on that. And I'm happy to see him make those moves in terms of Putin and making those kinds of comments. But he can't do that without both bolstering the idea that he is somehow a peacemaker among peacemakers, which is simply empirically not true. Continue to demand lauds like the Nobel Peace Prize, or furthermore, and even worse, have items such as the looking at the number of attacking different persons of nationalities as being inherently criminal and therefore destroying kind of good white people's Western lives. So, what are your thoughts on the UN speech there?
Oh, there's so many points to address and not a lot of time left, but I think a couple that come to mind. I mean, one, I actually do, would broadly agree about the UN being ineffectual, and I think it consistently has been ineffectual. I don't think it's because of I don't think it's because that international organizations couldn't. I think, kind of as you're saying, with the way the Security Council is structured and whatnot, it is just set up that it's not going to work. Essentially, when you give kind of veto authority to people that are problems or countries that are problems, you're not going to have any teeth. I would add, and I'm not necessarily a blame America first person most of the time, but we have had so much conspiratorial stuff about the UN over the last 30 or 40 years in American politics that I think it makes it really hard to interface with them. And it is, I think you're right. I mean, it's essentially a toothless organization where you're going to have, other people step into that vacuum, including the US. Beyond that, just a couple quick points. That list of conflicts that Trump, the wars that he ended, one, I don't think he had anything to do with any of those for the most part on a personal level. And two, at least a couple of those, the facts on the ground, there seems to be a ceasefire that nobody's nobody's obeying. It's not like a permanent sort of peace. I would, as one of the African ones in particular, I've seen mentioned that like from while there may be some legal understanding, the facts on the ground are exactly what they've always been. And I would add kind of Iran, Israel to that. I mean, we're not doing anything today. I have no belief that there's a permanent peace there, by any.
No, Iran is
stretch.
undoubtedly attempting to continue to have weapons that they ought not to have, and I think that we in the
and
global
Israel's
community
going
would
to
agree.
probably overreact, and yeah, I mean, it's just it's everybody's going to.
Well, whether they overreact or not, they're gonna go after weapons of that nature.
They're going to fight, yeah, either way,
Yeah.
So even several of them. He 3 points. One, I don't think he had a hand in most of these, to the extent that there is. Two, several of them are very much not settled. And three, anything that's left is early enough that I don't think we can, claim any kind of lasting thing out of any of that. Quickly, and I think this will be my last point, and it looks like we're getting kind of towards the end of our time here, but kind of on your point about sort of the kind of immigration statements, I think one of the concerns that I have as he internationalizes this is that there is this kind of transnational right-wing ethno-nationalist kind of movement right now, which is Trump, is Orban, is kind of parties that haven't won in other spots in Europe, but parties like AfD and Le Pen's party in France, where you have I think a lot of people are finding this rhetoric appealing, and it's a way it's in a way that concerns me tremendously, because then there are these potential sort of transnational sorts of alliances here, and it sets this norm, essentially, this norm in dealing with in dealing with these issues, where it becomes normalized to talk about migrant groups like this, et cetera. And we are a world that is more mobile than it has been. But for that matter, for most of our history, people are more mobile than you get credit for. I mean, to be making this statement, about Europe in particular, none of those borders are consistent. None of these countries existed in their current form prior to a few hundred years ago, and some of them are, I mean, Poland's borders change every time somebody gets a wild hair. So it was one of the best presentations I saw by one of our faculty. It was about it's the last time there were problems with Ukraine, and he had a series of maps and so, well, sometimes Poland's this, sometimes Poland's that, sometimes Poland's this, so I think that all of this is misplaced, but it is something where I am very concerned about sort of the global appeal of this message, this kind of ethno-nationalist democracy, because I think it runs very counter to, I mean, one, from a normative standpoint, I think people should be free to move. I mean, as an American, 3/4 of my DNA comes from like not English settlement, and I'm fine with that. And I think other people should have that opportunity, as well. But as an empirical matter as well, unwinding this is nuts. We live in a world where this has happened and Trump's mad about it. And, I get it. But even if you give him that, the ways that you undo this are ugly and expensive, but also ugly. And so, I'm very worried to hear that rhetoric, being normalized. And again, it is creeping in Europe, as well. And I do worry about, kind of the rise of that sort of thinking.
No, I think it's an excellent point. And again, like I said, that ethno-nationalism is such a frightening ideological position. But I think we'll stop the show there, although that might not be a bad place to stop in some ways, because what Justin and I are going to be doing in just a few minutes is we are going to start recording our supporters exclusive show. And he and I, we're actually be taking on a topic. So, Ken and I have for the last 2 years been working on the U.S. Constitution. We're going to be finishing that up here later in October. I'm really excited about that. Justin and I are going to be getting a project taking a look at contemporary and political ideologies, which I think is going to be just a blast. We're going to have a lot of fun with that. Ken and I are going to be going through the Federalist Papers. So we're really going to be breaking away from the traditional news cycles in these shows, which, as much fun as it is to do, is to kind of analyze and give evidence, as we've been doing here for like Trump's speeches or for the indictment. It is nice, I think, sometimes to step back, take a breath, and talk about the mechanistic work of science and politics. And that's what we're really going to get a chance to do. And so if you want to join us for that show, you've got to be a supporter. So if not, you're just going to get a few minutes and then you're going to want more anyway. So you might as well just buy now and, get the whole deal.
The appetizer. It's like it's like the samples at the grocery store, and the whole wall to buy it. So, yeah.
When has Costco never snookered me into buying something by, the samples? Like, you might as well just buy it and just believe it's good, because why else would it be there in the floor? It's a true story. So it's the same thing here. You already know what Justin and I are going to bring you. We're delicious. Get more. Become a supporter now. I think we just said I was delicious. I think we're going to keep that.
You absolutely. I'll be angry with you if you don't. I'm getting T-shirts made, I think. The politics guys are delicious.
Yeah, I think that fits well. So get more deliciousness by becoming a supporter of the show. And you can do that by heading to the show notes. You can click through right there. Or if you would like to, you can always go to politicsguys.com/support, where you can become the different kind of levels your support. You can always get us on Patreon at Politics Guys as well. You can, if you wish to, you can always contact us in a variety of ways. But one of the easiest is to email us at mail@politicsguys.com. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this episode. It means a lot. And probably the biggest things you can do is share this episode with some commentary on social media. At President Trump, we talked about him a lot today. He might want to listen and respond. Who knows? But do those things. That makes a big difference for the algorithms. I also want to give a big thank you to all of our executive supporters, because they are the top of those supporters, and that just means the world to us. And so here they all are: Wilma Marino, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, and Jody Miller. We'll be back with a new full episode next weekend, and I hope you'll join us then.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,